The problem wasn't that she couldn't move, it was that no one had reached her in years. The specialist stepped out of the glass-walled therapy room with a practiced expression that tried to look neutral but landed somewhere closer to defeat. His polished shoes quiet against the marble as he adjusted his cufflinks and avoided eye contact with the woman waiting in the hallway. Evelyn Whitmore didn't ask him how it went because she already knew. She had learned to read the silence before the words. The slight hesitation in a professional's breath, the way their shoulders lowered just a fraction as they walked away from something they couldn't fix. Inside the room, her daughter sat exactly where she had been placed hours earlier. Small frame resting against a custom-built chair worth more than most people's cars. Her hands still, her gaze distant but not empty. Never empty, just unreachable. Monitors blinked softly beside her. Quiet, controlled, expensive. Everything in that room was designed to restore control. Except nothing had. Not in 3 years. Not since the accident. That took movement from her body and something harder to name from her spirit. Evelyn turned slightly, her heels barely making a sound on the floor as she looked through the glass. She didn't cry anymore. Not here. Not where people could see. Outside. Past the carefully landscaped yard. A maintenance truck idled near the edge of the property. A man stood beside it, sleeves rolled, hands steady as he adjusted the sprinkler system that refused to align properly with the slope of the lawn. Malcolm. Hayes didn't belong in this world of glass and quiet money. Not by anyone's definition. His work boots carried dust. His shirt bore the faint outline of a long day that started before sunrise. But his movements were unhurried, deliberate, like someone who had learned that rushing rarely fixed what was truly broken. He twisted the valve, stepped back, watched the water arc across the grass in a clean, even line, then stopped. Not because the job was done, but because something caught his attention. A flicker, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Through the glass he saw the girl, her head tilted just slightly toward the window, her eyes following something beyond the room. Malcolm's gaze shifted and found it, a red kite drifting low across the neighboring property, its tail dancing in the late afternoon breeze. He didn't move closer, didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He just stood there, watching the way her eyes tracked the movement, slow, deliberate, like there was still something inside her reaching for the world even if her body couldn't follow. Behind the glass, Evelyn noticed it too. Not the kite, but the change. So small it could have been dismissed if she hadn't spent years searching for anything that resembled progress. Her daughter's eyes were focused, not drifting, not fading, focused and outside. The man by the sprinklers remained still, as if he understood that sometimes the most important thing you could do was not interrupt a moment trying to come back to life. You should not be standing there. The voice cut through the quiet like a line drawn too sharply across a still surface, controlled, precise, and used to being obeyed. Malcolm turned his head slowly, not startled, just aware, and found Evelyn Whitmore already walking toward him across the patio, her posture straight, her expression composed in the way people learn when they cannot afford to show what is breaking underneath. The glass doors behind her reflected a world of order and authority, and she carried both with her as if they were part of her clothing. This area is restricted, she added, her tone not raised, but firm enough to leave no room for interpretation. Malcolm nodded once, respectful, not defensive. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, his voice low and even. The kind of voice that did not push against a wall, but did not shrink from it either. He stepped back half a pace from the window, not turning away completely. Not yet. Evelyn followed his line of sight despite herself, her eyes landing on her daughter. Again, still seated, still silent. But something in her posture had shifted just enough to be unsettling, as if a single thread in a tightly woven fabric had come loose. Evelyn felt it before she could name it, and that was what made her sharper. She needs consistency, Evelyn said, more to regain control of the moment than to inform him. Not interruptions. Malcolm's gaze returned to her, steady, unhurried. I did not touch anything, he replied, and it was true. He had not moved closer then. The glass allowed, had not spoken loudly, had not signaled or gestured. He had only watched the same way he had learned to watch his own son when words were not enough. Evelyn crossed her arms lightly. A subtle barrier. People come here with ideas, she continued. They think they see something. They think they can help. and then they leave when nothing changes. Her voice did not crack, but there was weight behind it, years of it. Malcolm listened without interrupting, without offering solutions, without trying to place himself above the long line of those who had failed before him. He simply let the silence settle between them, not empty, but full, the kind of silence that does not rush to prove anything. Evelyn found that more disarming than any argument. She studied him for a moment longer than she intended, noticing details she would normally dismiss, the worn edges of his gloves, the careful way he stood as if he understood space and boundaries without being told, the absence of urgency in his movements. "You should finish your work," she said finally, turning slightly. As if to close the interaction, Malcolm gave a small nod. "I will," he answered, but before he stepped away, his eyes shifted once more toward the glass, toward the girl inside, and something in his expression changed, not pity, not curiosity, something quieter, something more certain. "She is still watching," he said, not as a challenge, not even as a suggestion, just a simple observation placed gently into the space between them. Evelyn paused mid-step, just for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause no one else would notice. But she did, because she felt it, the truth in what he said pressing lightly against the wall she had built. She did not respond, not yet, but she did not correct him either, and for the first time in a long time, control did not return immediately. It lingered just out of reach. While inside the glass room, Lila's eyes remained fixed, not on the machines, not on the ceiling, but on something beyond the room, something that had finally given her a reason to look. The wind shifted just enough to change everything, not dramatically, not in a way that would draw attention from anyone who was not already watching, but enough to send something light and forgotten rolling across the edge of the patio. A small paper pinwheel left behind near the maintenance tools. Its faded, red edges catching the breeze as it spun once, then again, before slipping off the stone and onto the grass. Malcolm noticed it first because he was still there, still finishing what he said he would finish, adjusting the final valve with measured precision. But his attention followed the motion instinctively, the way it always did when something moved without force, without demand. The pinwheel rolled slowly, unevenly, until it came to rest just inches from the large glass wall, right where Lila could see it, inside the room. Her gaze shifted, not fast, not sudden, but deliberate, her eyes tracking the fragile movement as if it carried something more than color and paper. Malcolm straightened, watching from where he stood, not stepping closer, not calling out, just letting the moment exist without interference. Behind him, one of the security staff moved slightly, uncertain, but did not intervene, and inside, for the first time that day, Lila's fingers twitched, barely visible, a small tremor that could have been dismissed as nothing if not for the timing. Her hand rested on the arm of the chair, still restrained by silence. But something inside her responded, something remembered what it felt like to reach. Evelyn saw it from the reflection in the glass before she saw it directly. Her breath caught just slightly, not enough to make a sound, but enough to change the rhythm inside her chest. She stepped closer without realizing it, her focus narrowing to that single point, her daughter's hand, her daughter's eyes, the pinwheel, the distance between them. Malcolm moved then, but not toward the door, not toward the girl. He walked slowly along the edge of the patio until he was directly in her line of sight, lowering himself carefully to one knee, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that aligned with hers, eye level, equal, present. He picked up the pinwheel gently, holding it between his fingers, and instead of spinning it with his hand, he leaned forward slightly and blew across it, soft, steady, the blades turning with a quiet whir, nothing loud, nothing forced, just enough to create movement. Lila's eyes locked onto it, unblinking now, and then, slowly, as if the signal had to travel through a path that had been silent for too long, her fingers curled, just slightly, not reaching yet, but no longer still. Malcolm did not rush, did not speak. He just repeated the motion, a breath, a spin, a pause, giving her time, giving her space, behind the glass. Evelyn's composure cracked in a way no one else could see, because it did not show on her face. It showed in what she did not do. She did not interrupt. She did not call security. She did not step in to control the moment. She stood there, watching, as something she had not been able to buy, train, or command began to take shape in front of her. Fragile, uncertain, but real, and for the first time in years, the room did not feel like a place of waiting. It felt like a place where something had finally been heard. Do it again. The words came softer than anything Evelyn Whitmore had said that day, but they carried more weight than any command she had given in years. Malcolm did not look up immediately, not because he did not hear her, but because he was still watching the girl, still measuring the rhythm of her breath, the timing of her small movements, the fragile thread that had just begun to reconnect something inside her. He gave the pinwheel one more gentle spin with his breath, then let it slow on its own, letting the moment settle instead of chasing it. Only then did he rise slowly to his feet and turn toward Evelyn, his expression calm, grounded, not expectant, not impressed by what had just happened, as if he understood that one moment did not mean the work was done. She moved, Evelyn said, and for the first time there was something unguarded in her voice, not disbelief, not hope, something in between, something that had been buried under too many disappointments to fully surface yet. Malcolm nodded once, not confirming, not correcting, just acknowledging what she had seen. She followed. He replied quietly, choosing his words with care. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. No one has gotten that kind of response in months, she said, more to herself now than to him. Malcolm did not step closer, did not try to claim credit. People try to move her, he said after a brief pause. I just gave her something to move toward. The sentence settled into the space between them, simple, but it shifted something. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment longer, searching for something she could challenge, something she could control, but there was nothing in him that pushed back, nothing that needed to win, and that made him harder to dismiss than any expert she had hired. Behind the glass, Lila's hand relaxed again, the movement fading as quietly as it had begun, but her eyes remained fixed, not drifting, not empty, still present. Evelyn turned slightly, looking back at her daughter, then back at Malcolm, the decision forming before she could fully justify it. 10 minutes, she said, her voice returning to its structured calm, but not as rigid as before. Tomorrow, you come back, you get 10 minutes, nothing more. Malcolm did not respond immediately, not because he was considering whether to accept, but because he was considering the girl, the time, the pressure that could come with expectation. No pressure, he said finally, his tone steady. No crowd, no instructions, just space. Evelyn almost interrupted, almost reclaimed control of the terms, but she stopped herself, the memory of her daughter's fingers curling just enough to matter, holding her in place. She gave a small nod instead, controlled, but real. 10 minutes, she repeated, this time not as an order, but as an agreement. Malcolm inclined his head slightly, then stepped back, returning to his tools without another word. Without stretching the moment into something larger than it needed to be, Evelyn remained where she was for a few seconds longer, watching him work as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if the smallest change did not deserve noise. And inside the glass room, Lila's eyes shifted once more, not toward the machines, not toward the ceiling, but toward the place where the man had been, as if something in her had recognized not what he did, but how he did it. And for the first time, Evelyn did not rush to explain it. She simply stood there, letting the silence hold something new. The next morning arrived without announcement, the kind of quiet morning that made everything feel more fragile than it actually was. Sunlight stretched slowly across the polished floors of the Whitmore estate, touching glass, steel, and silence in equal measure. Inside the therapy room, nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Lila sat where she always sat, her posture supported, her hands resting where they had been placed, but her eyes were not drifting the way they used to. They were waiting, not obviously, not in a way anyone trained to measure progress would record, but in a way only someone looking for presence would notice. Outside, Malcolm arrived 10 minutes early, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he had learned long ago that rushing into a moment could break it before it even began. He parked the truck along the far edge of the driveway and sat for a second, just breathing, steadying himself, thinking not about what he would do, but about how he would be. The difference mattered more than most people understood. When he stepped out, the morning air was cool, just under 60 degrees, carrying the faint scent of trimmed grass and distant traffic that never quite reached the estate. He walked toward the garden without looking at the house first, without scanning for approval, his pace even, grounded. When he reached the patio, Evelyn was already there, not in heels. This time, not dressed for a boardroom, but still composed in a way that did not come off easily. Her phone rested face down on the table beside her, a small decision that would have gone unnoticed by anyone else. Malcolm noticed it, not as a detail to analyze, but as a signal. "You are early," she said, her voice quieter than it had been the day before. Malcolm gave a small nod. "So is she," he replied, his eyes shifting briefly toward the glass. Evelyn followed his gaze, and there it was. Again, that slight tension in her chest, the kind that came from wanting to believe something before you were ready to admit it. 10 minutes, she reminded him, though there was less edge in it now. Malcolm did not respond with words. He simply moved to the same spot as before, lowering himself slowly until he was level with Lila again. This time he did not bring anything with him. No object, no distraction, just himself, just presence. He waited, not speaking, not moving too quickly, giving her time to recognize him, to remember without being forced. Inside, Lila's eyes shifted, not immediately, not dramatically, but enough. She saw him, not as a shape, not as part of the background, but as something familiar now, something that had already made sense once. Malcolm let a few seconds pass before he spoke, his voice low, steady, almost blending with the quiet hum of the room. "Good morning," he said, simple, not expecting a response, not needing one. He rested his hands loosely on his knees, open, non-threatening, and then he leaned forward just slightly and exhaled, a soft breath, not strong enough to move anything in the room, but enough to create a rhythm, a signal, a memory of yesterday. Lila's fingers trembled again, a little more this time, not controlled, not intentional yet, but no longer accidental. Malcolm did not react outwardly, did not praise, did not rush. He just stayed, letting the moment grow at its own pace. Outside the glass, Evelyn stood still, her arms no longer crossed, her posture no longer defensive, watching not like a CEO evaluating performance, but like a mother witnessing something she had almost forgotten how to hope for. And for the first time in years, the 10 minutes ahead did not feel like a countdown. They felt like something opening, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably real. Time did not move the way it used to inside that room. It stretched, softened, lost its sharp edges. 10 minutes no longer felt like a limit, but like a space where something fragile could exist without being rushed. Malcolm remained where he was, steady, grounded, not filling the silence, not trying to guide it too quickly. He had learned that children, especially those who had learned to retreat, did not respond to urgency. They responded to safety, and safety could not be forced, it had to be felt. Lila's fingers moved again. A little more than before, not a full motion, not something that could be measured on a chart, but enough to show intention, enough to show that something inside her was trying to reach back. Malcolm noticed, but he did not react, not outwardly. He simply adjusted his breathing slightly, slower, deeper, giving her a rhythm to follow if she chose to. "You do not have to rush," he said quietly, his voice calm, almost blending into the room itself. "Nothing here is asking you to hurry." The words were not instructions, they were permission, and permission was something she had not been given in a long time. Outside the glass, Evelyn watched with a focus that had nothing to do with control anymore. She was not looking for proof, not looking for results she could report. She was watching for something she could feel, something real. Malcolm shifted slightly, just enough to rest his elbow on his knee, bringing himself a little closer to her level without invading her space. "I have a son," he said after a moment, not looking away from her, but not forcing eye contact either. "He hates it when people talk at him like he is broken." He gave a small, almost invisible smile. "He says it makes him feel smaller than he already is." Lila's eyes flickered, not fully focused on the words, but something in the tone, in the cadence, reached her in a way that language sometimes could not. Malcolm continued, his voice still low, still even. "So I learned to just sit with him sometimes. No fixing, no pushing, just being there until he decided to meet me halfway." Another small pause, not empty, but intentional. Lila's hand shifted again. this time her fingers curling slightly inward, then releasing, then curling. Again, the movement uneven, uncertain, but undeniably hers. Malcolm did not celebrate it, did not draw attention to it. He simply stayed, allowing her to own the moment without pressure. Outside, Evelyn's breath slowed without her realizing it. Her body no longer braced for disappointment, her hands resting at her sides instead of gripping each other. For the first time, she was not waiting for the moment to disappear. She was letting it exist, and inside the room, something subtle but profound was taking place. Not a miracle, not a sudden change, but a shift in direction. As if for the first time in years, Lila was not being pulled forward by expectation, but gently invited back by presence. And she was beginning, slowly, quietly, to respond. Malcolm did not look at the clock, but he felt the shift when the 10 minutes began to close. Not because anything in the room changed, but because time outside it continued to move, pulling at moments that were not ready to end. He stayed where he was, steady, allowing the quiet to stretch just a little longer. Lila's fingers rested now, no longer trembling, but not completely still either, as if they had remembered something and were holding on to it. Malcolm lowered his voice even further, not to hide his words, but to make sure they did not wait too much when they reached her. "You did good," he said softly, not as praise, but as recognition. Something simple, something true. Her eyes shifted again, just a fraction, but enough to acknowledge that she was still there, still aware, still choosing in her own way to remain connected. Outside the glass, Evelyn exhaled slowly, a breath she had been holding without realizing it, her shoulders easing just enough to change her posture. She stepped closer to the door, but did not open it. Not yet. Not wanting to break what had taken shape inside. Malcolm leaned back slightly, giving Lila more space as the moment settled. He knew better than to stretch it too far, knew that pushing even a little too much could turn something delicate into something fragile. "I will come back tomorrow," he said, not asking, not promising in a way that created pressure, just stating it as something steady, something she could expect without needing to respond. Lila's eyes remained on him, and for the first time, there was a trace of something new behind them. Not movement, not expression in the way most people would define it, but presence that did not fade when the moment ended. Malcolm slowly rose to his feet, careful, unhurried, making sure the transition did not feel abrupt. He stepped back just enough to create distance without disconnecting completely, then turned toward the door. As he reached it, Evelyn opened it before he could. Their eyes met for a brief second, and this time there was no immediate defense in hers, no sharp edge to protect what she had spent years trying to control. There was something else, something quieter, something closer to understanding. "What you did," she began, then stopped, as if the sentence she had prepared no longer fit what she had just witnessed. Malcolm shook his head gently before she could finish, not dismissing her, but redirecting the weight of the moment. "I did not do anything to her," he said calmly. "I just stayed long enough for her to not feel alone." The words landed differently than anything she had heard from the experts, because they did not come with a method, a plan, or a cost. They came with something she could not measure. Evelyn held his gaze, searching for something to anchor to, but finding only sincerity, and that unsettled her in a way she was not used to. She responded. She said quietly, almost testing the words as she spoke them. Malcolm nodded once. She chose to. He replied, simple, steady. The distinction mattered, more than she wanted to admit. Behind them, Lila remained in her chair, but the room no longer felt like a place where nothing changed. It felt like a place where something had begun, and as Malcolm stepped out into the morning light again, Evelyn stayed by the door a moment longer, not calling after him, not giving another instruction, just standing there, realizing that for the first time in years, she did not know exactly what would happen next, and for once, that uncertainty did not feel like failure. It felt like possibility. That afternoon did not return to what it used to be. Not completely. Not anymore. Something subtle had shifted, and it stayed. Even after Malcolm's footsteps faded beyond the garden and the gates closed behind the maintenance truck, inside the house, Evelyn stood in the doorway longer than she needed to, her hand resting lightly against the frame, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, as if stepping back into the room required a different version of herself than the one who had walked out. Earlier that morning, She entered quietly, not announcing her presence, not calling Lila's name the way she used to. Because for the first time she understood that silence was not empty. It was space, and space was something her daughter might finally be able to use. She moved closer, slowly, until she was standing just beside the chair, close enough to be seen, but not so close that it would feel like pressure. Lila's eyes shifted toward her, not immediately, but with intention, and that alone made Evelyn pause. She did not reach out right away, did not adjust anything, did not fix the blanket or reposition her daughter's hand. She simply stood there, present, her breathing slower than usual, matching something she had seen earlier without realizing she was doing it. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice different now, less structured, less controlled, something warmer underneath. Lila's gaze held for a moment, longer than it had in weeks, and then, slowly, her fingers moved. Again, just a small curl, a quiet effort that carried more meaning than anything Evelyn had witnessed in years. Her throat tightened, but she did not react outwardly. She remembered what she had seen, how he had stayed still, how he had not rushed to celebrate or push for more. So she did the same. She stayed, letting the moment belong to Lila instead of turning it into something to manage. Minutes passed like that, not dramatic, not filled with action, but full in a way the room had not felt before. Outside, the sun moved lower, casting longer shadows through the glass. And inside, Evelyn reached for the chair beside her daughter and sat down, slowly, carefully, not as someone in charge, but as someone willing to wait. She placed her phone on the table without looking at it, without checking it, letting it remain silent. And for the first time in a long time, she did not feel the urge to fill the space with instructions, questions, or solutions. She simply stayed, her hand resting on her lap, close enough that Lila could reach if she wanted to, but not guiding her, not asking her to try, just offering presence, without expectation. And after a while, something small but undeniable happened. Lila's fingers shifted again, this time not just curling, but lifting, just slightly, barely an inch, but enough to close the distance between them just a little, not fully, not yet, but enough to show that she was not retreating anymore. Evelyn's eyes softened, not with relief, not with certainty, but with something steadier, something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Trust, not in the outcome, not in a promise, but in the process that had finally begun to unfold, quietly, without force, without pressure, just presence meeting presence. And for the first time, she understood that maybe her daughter did not need to be brought back to the world all at once. Maybe she just needed someone to sit close enough, long enough, for her to find her way back on her own. The next day did not arrive quietly. It arrived with resistance, not from the room, not from Lila, but from everything built around them. By the time Malcolm's truck rolled past the front gates again, the air felt different, tighter, as if something unseen had already decided this would not be allowed to continue without question. Inside the house, Evelyn stood at the long dining table with two men in tailored suits and a woman holding a tablet, their voices low but firm, controlled in the way professionals speak when they believe they are protecting something important. "This is not a structured treatment," one of them said, his tone careful but unmistakably disapproving. "There is no clinical framework, no measurable protocol." The woman added, scrolling through notes, "We cannot justify exposure without oversight." Evelyn listened, her posture straight, her expression composed, but something had shifted in her that made their words land differently than they would have even a day ago. "You said the same thing about the last 6 specialists," she replied evenly, not raising her voice, but not softening it either. The room went quiet for a second, not because they did not have answers, but because the answer they had no longer mattered the same way. Outside, Malcolm stepped out of his truck and paused, not because he was unsure, but because he could feel the tension even before he saw it. He adjusted his gloves slowly, taking a breath, grounding himself the same way he always did before stepping into something uncertain. When he reached the patio, the glass doors remained closed longer than usual, and for a brief moment, the stillness felt different, heavier. But inside, beyond the reflection of polished surfaces and controlled conversations, Lila was there. Her eyes already turned toward the place where he had been the day before, waiting, not in a way anyone inside the room would acknowledge, but in a way that was unmistakable to anyone who had learned to notice presence instead of performance.
We strongly
Evelyn
advise
saw it
against this
too.
course of action.
And that was
It
the
goes
moment
against
something
everything we
inside her
discussed.
settled into
appreciate the
clarity.
advice,
She
but I am
turned back to the
confident in
people
this
at the
direction.
table, her voice calm. But finally, 10 minutes, she said, the same words as before. But they carried a different meaning now. Not a test, not an experiment, a decision. He gets 10 minutes. One of the men opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when he saw her expression, not harsh, not defensive, but steady in a way that did not invite negotiation. Outside, the door finally opened, and Malcolm stepped in without hesitation. Without needing explanation, he moved to the same spot, lowering himself once again to Lila's level, as if nothing around them had changed, because in the only place that mattered, it had not. He did not look at. The others did not acknowledge the tension behind the glass. He focused only on her. "I am here," he said quietly, simple, consistent. Lila's fingers moved again, a little stronger this time. Not enough to change the world, but enough to prove that something inside her was still choosing to respond. Behind him, the room remained divided between belief and doubt, between control and surrender. But Malcolm did not turn, did not argue, did not prove anything. He just stayed, the same way he had, from the beginning. And as the minutes passed, something became clear, not to everyone, not all at once, but undeniably. Change had already begun, not because someone forced it, not because someone claimed it, but because someone had finally been willing to meet it where it was, without trying to own it. And as Evelyn watched from the doorway, no longer hiding behind instructions or
We strongly advise
expectations,
against
she
this course
understood
of action.
something she
It
had
goes
not
against
allowed
everything
herself
we
to believe
discussed.
I
before.
appreciate
He
the
did not
advice,
raise
but
his
I am
voice.
confident in this
He did not
direction.
raise hope. He raised something quieter, something stronger. He raised her faith in people.